Go back to driving your tractors. The words landed like a stone on a pond, and the ripples never stopped. I want you to picture that moment. A polished office, Enzo Ferrari's voice like a verdict, and Ferruccio Lamborghini standing there with grease under his nails and a pride that had been forged in war-ravaged fields and factory floors. It was more than an insult. It was a dismissal of everything he had built. His competence, his taste, his claim to belong in the room where legends were made. Ferruccio could have walked away. He could have returned to steady, respectable work. Tractors that fed Italy, machines that kept livelihoods spinning. Instead, the sting became a kind of fuel. In the months that followed, his factory hummed differently. Nights stretched long and sharp. Drafts and sketches scattered across a table. Models lashed together at dawn by a handful of men who'd heard the same words and felt the same itch to prove a point. They argued about torque and balance, about weight distribution and how a car should sit on the road like a predator waits at the edge of a field. There were fights, temper flaring, friendships tested, and the kind of stubborn attention to detail that turns good engines into legends. This is not a story of instant triumph. It is a study in how practical decisions, not miracles, erect empires. Choosing engineers who would work without applause, risking capital when creditors frowned, canceling comfort to buy a better transmission. There were mistakes, experiments that failed, investments that nearly sank the company, but each failure taught a lesson more valuable than the next trophy. The Miura began as an answer to a humiliation. It grew into a design that rearranged expectations about what a road car could be. If you've ever been told you don't belong, if you've felt a door shut in your face, Ferruccio's first furious hours are for you. In the next segment, we'll unpack the concrete steps he and his team took, how anger was converted into strategy, how sleepless nights became engineering breakthroughs, and how close calls almost derailed everything. Before we move on, tell me in the comments, what's the single biggest thing killing your results today? I read every one. If this speaks to you, like the video and stay with us. There's a method coming that is both brutal and practical. Go back to driving your tractors. The words hung in the Milan air like a verdict, but they landed inside Ferruccio Lamborghini as fuel rather than shame. He walked back to his workshop feeling the heat of that insult, but also a quiet clarity. If a man as blunt as Enzo Ferrari could dismiss him with a single sentence, then proof would be forged on a road where words meant nothing and metal spoke for itself. Ferruccio was not a dreamer who lived on racing posters. He was a mechanic of industry, a pragmatic man who built tractors from war-scarred scraps and turned them into reliable machines that kept Italy moving. In the dim light of his factory, under the scent of oil and hot metal, he began sketching not out of ego but out of stubborn craftsmanship. "If they think I belong in the fields," he told his foreman one night, voice low and steady, "then I'll take the field and make it run circles around their track." What followed were sleepless nights and a string of uncomfortable choices. He pulled capital from a prosperous tractor business into a risky, prestige-driven automotive venture. He recruited engineers who were equally stubborn, men who argued over gearbox ratios, over chassis stiffness, over the philosophy of what a grand tourer could be. In one corner of the atelier, Paolo and Giampaolo debated the merits of a rear engine. In another, a young designer sketched a car that would sit low and sensual like a sculpture made to move. The atmosphere was tense but electric. Mistakes were frequent, arguments louder, but each setback sharpened the team's intent. Ferruccio's style was not flamboyant. He insisted on comfort and build quality, little luxuries that mattered to a buyer sitting behind the wheel for hours, not just the blinding thrill of a racetrack lap. He gambled on a mid-engine layout when conventional wisdom favored front-engine grand tourers, trusting aggression tempered by engineering discipline. That gamble nearly bankrupted him more than once. Prototypes that failed, suppliers who delayed, money that vanished faster than profit margins could recoup. Yet with every failed test and every exhausting midnight, the brand's identity hardened. The Miura emerged not as an accident but as the accumulated result of tactical risk, relentless iteration, and Ferruccio's insistence that utility and beauty could be the same thing. It was revenge that learned to build, not to wreck. If any of this rings true, if you've ever turned a slight into action, leave a note below and tell me the single biggest thing killing your results today. Stay with me. Next, we'll translate the grit and gambles into a step-by-step blueprint you can use. Night after night, the workshop smelled of oil, hot metal, and stubborn hope. Ferruccio walked those concrete floors with a cigarette between his fingers and a ledger of debts in his pocket. But his eyes were fixed on a silhouette on jack stands. A car so low and narrow it looked born to slip under wind. Around him a handful of engineers moved like conspirators. Hands stained with grease, voices reduced to clipped Italian, and the occasional whispered dare. "Make it mid-engine," one said. "No one does that for a road car." Ferruccio only smiled, the old insult from Enzo still a soft bruise at the back of his throat. "Go back to driving your tractors." An echo that now sounded less like humiliation and more like a map. They bent the rules. They worked through calamitous tests. Engines that refused to breathe, gearboxes that split the night with ugly sounds. There were nights when Ferruccio leaned against a workbench and let the silence answer his doubts, imagining the board's creditors and the expectant faces of his men. Yet every failure taught a cut, and every cut taught a contour. When the engine finally purred, it was not a quiet victory but a release. A deep, feline growl that filled the hangar and made the light fixtures tremble. The first drive came at dawn along a narrow coastal road. Ferruccio sat behind the wheel, palms steady on a wooden rim, the horizon painted in orange. As the car unfurled its speed, as the double exhaust sang and the wind carved the air around that low body, something inside him shifted. This was more than revenge. It was a statement. Villagers stopped and watched the silhouette slip by, mouths open. Engineers hugged in the dust. Critics who had dismissed him would have to recalibrate their arrogance. But vindication is never merely spectacle, it's strategic. The Miura was a gamble paid in sleepless nights and borrowed capital, a lesson in how to convert a single insult into a disciplined obsession. If this narrative of stubborn, methodical defiance strikes a chord, like the video, and tell me, what's the single biggest thing killing your results today? Subscribe and join me in the next segment, where we extract the exact, repeatable steps Ferruccio used to turn humiliation into an empire. He stood alone on the factory floor as dawn smeared pale gold across metal, tractors waiting in neat lines, and in the corner a single sheet-covered shape that would not stay hidden. You can still feel the echo of those 5 words. Go back to driving your tractors, not shouted from some distant archive, but spoken by a rival who meant to dismiss him, to define him. Ferruccio felt the burn of that dismissal like a physical weight, and instead of letting it crush him, he turned it into an axis. He paced through the workshop, listened to the cough of imperfect engines, and remembered the nights when sleep was a currency he refused to spend. In that silence, he made a promise to himself and to the handful of engineers who trusted his madness. Build something no one expected, and make them eat their certainty. The Miura was never an act of spite alone. It was a disciplined response to a problem Ferruccio had mapped with surgical patience. He gambled the company's cash, he tore down prototypes, he argued with designers until ideas bled into reality. There were near-bankruptcy phone calls, litigious nights, and the kind of exhaustion that reshapes character. Yet every setback sharpened the intent. Focus ruthlessly on the one product that can redefine perception. Assemble people who will tell you hard truths, and treat technical excellence as your language of persuasion. That's the sober lesson. Vengeance without strategy is pyrotechnics. Vengeance with a plan becomes legacy. If the story landed for you, then treat it like a set of instructions disguised as drama. Name the single thing killing your results. Strip it down to one problem and aim every resource at it. Keep a tight runway of cash, prototype fast, iterate with trusted skeptics, and let product excellence do the talking when words fail. If the insult of a rival, or the weight of being underestimated, still stings, let it be fuel, not distraction. If this resonated, leave a like and tell me in the comments. What's the single biggest thing killing your results today? I read every answer. Subscribe for the next piece. I'll walk through Ferruccio's exact step-by-step blueprint. How he prioritized, protected resources, and turned a taunt into a timeless brand.